This is Shane Gibson's podcast from closingbigger.net. This episode is focused on the future of sales for tech companies and the technology channel. And it is actually a recording of a live interview I did with Julian Lee, publisher of e-channelnews at Channel Next West, Canada's leading technology channel conference series. Join us again this October 21st and 22nd in Whistler, British Columbia, where I will keynote on AI for business growth. Now, without further ado, let's dive into this podcast.
So let's talk about sales.
Yeah.
So I would suggest that what he was talking about there makes a lot of sense. But what does it really mean, right? So if you're out there as an MSP or a vendor, right, and you're challenged with what do we do next to help my sales team to go next level, right? Is it a course? Is it the ongoing course? Like, what is the first one thing they must do right?
Yeah, and that's like the question I often get is, what's the one thing you need to know to close big enterprise deals? And my answer is there's more than one thing you need to know to close enterprise deals. That's the answer. And so, I think that the number one thing for me in what's missing I asked a panel of VPs of sales that a few years back from Salesforce to, major web infrastructure provider companies to agencies, and these VPs all said the same thing. This was like unscripted, which was amazing. And they said, one-on-ones is actually coaching your people as a sales leader is the most important thing. And so spending all kinds of time behind our dashboard and me calling Julian up and going, Julian, I'm looking at your numbers and you made 36 calls this week and you should make 50. What's going on? That's not coaching, right? That's auditing. That's a part of what we need to do to keep people compliant with their KPIs. But coaching is I'm sitting next to Julian and I'm listening to his calls, or I'm listening to those conversations he's having and I'm going, you missed an opportunity to ask a question that would have found a need. Here's what I would have said. And then Julian makes a note, right? And he learns that way. And so the side-by-side co-pilot coaching is a really important part. That's the first part. If people aren't doing that and I go in and deliver a sales training for their company and then their managers don't then implement it by sitting beside their people and make sure it happens, then maybe they'll invite me back the next year. But for me, they're not getting the results. And so it's a partnership whenever you hire an external sales training provider or invest in any methodology that your management team needs to buy into it as well. And if they don't have the skill set, then you need to invest in giving them the coaching skills to actually coach their people. I've been hired in the past. Again, it's like taking the order. Someone's like, can you come in and coach my team? I'm like, yeah. And I take the money and I do it. But it's not the same as when their sales leader coaches them. And so I think that, that
coaching.
Yeah.
I mean, I agree with you. One thing you mentioned, you said that it's easy to say when a customer gives you an objective, right? It says no. Well, here's a way around that, right? And you just do say yes, yes, yes. You get the deal. You're done. High five, right?
Yeah.
But you're probably going down the wrong path, right? I mean, that may be what it used to be, right? Because you just want to get it done and out type thing. But now it's really about uncovering that truth, right? And I don't want to sound weird, but I think the truth matters, right? And companies today, I don't know if you know the cybersecurity world, right? If you don't get this right, like a lot of people lose their shirts, right? It's like you can't fake this one till you make it, if you know what I mean, right? So when you are not being truthful with your customers, you're actually opening the risk. It's a multiplier. So I said that's an important point to add to the coaching. So now we've got this traditional way of doing business where we would teach people how to do some selling, or we'll go through a course and whatever, right? Is there any data that's showing, like, when you take a course, like what happens the next month after?
There's, a lot of data I've seen has been recycled, and if you actually look at it, like, it's been around for a long time. So I do know anecdotally, like from my own experience, that if you train a team and you just deliver the information, and it's like one way, then the retention is low. Now, if you actually, what we found though is if we have testing, so like we got online courses now with clients where there's a quiz at the end of each module to see what they learned. Just that one thing where they have to do a quick quiz and then submit an implementation doc to their manager, it goes up significantly. And then if you combine that with coaching, then one-on-one check-ins, then it starts to become a true sales enablement tool. And for me, my finding is that, a hybrid approach is even better. So you do, a lot of people do like self-directed learning, so they don't have to all be stuck in a room in the middle of a time when they could be selling, so they can take in a lot of the information at their own pace. But then there has to be a in-person aspect of it as well. So kind of the best sales training or even leadership training or whatever training you're doing, especially in human communications, there's an element of learn at your own pace, testing, coaching, and then in-person interaction. Seems to work the best as far as the format goes. But I'm finding that, we all like to watch TikTok videos now on Instagram, and our attention span's low. So, 15-minute chunks of information max seem to be, what's working, right?
How long, in your experience, right, does it take to take a salesperson from wherever they are to actually seeing noticeable results?
So, it can be immediate.
Yeah.
Like, I've had people whose closing ratios on quotes was like 10%. And then I've said, how many people are you asking for the next appointment before you write the quote? And they're like, none. And I'm like, okay, before you agree to write a quote or proposal, book a follow-up time to review it with them. All of a sudden they went from 10 to 40%. So sometimes it's rifle-focused coaching/training, right? So sometimes if there's a process thing, you can tweak it a little bit. If it's an emotional intelligence or empathy issue, that's more work, right?
Yeah.
I think that's actually probably, to a large degree, an HR problem. You hired the wrong person, right? And so, but sales process. Now, with that said, over time, a matter of 90 days, I've seen significant increase when you shift sales strategy. Something simple is the fact that they're not even using the Pareto principle, which is where they're 20% of your business is going to come from 80% of your clients. So have I learned how to build that criteria really well? And is all my proactive time and even my sales plan and my KPIs focused on that market? Or are my people just out there knocking on every door? And so just a shift like that within 90 days, you'll see a significant increase in deal size. And also your sales cycle shortens. It's kind of contrarian to what you think. If you go after bigger, more lucrative opportunities that you really understand that market well, your sales cycle shortens in comparison to if you're just open to going after anybody, right?
You mentioned as well making sure that the actual information is more. It sounds kind of weird. When you actually make the actual transition, right, to becoming all these things that you talk about, right?
Yeah.
How does salespeople know what they don't know? Like, I'm a good salesperson. I've been doing this now for 20 years, right? I know what to do, right?
Yeah.
You can't convince some people, right, that they need to do this stuff, right? How do you change that and make them understand that they need to do these things?
Back to, there's truth in numbers, right? So you sit down and review their pipeline in Salesforce or Dynamics, whatever you're using, and that can be telling. And sometimes, I have to wait till someone's not doing stuff well to actually run into a wall themselves where they're open to feedback. Sometimes there's a lot of ego involved. Right. But to a large degree, for me, one of them is, Dennis Covier, and when we wrote Dr. Dennis Covier and I wrote the book, Real Results in a Virtual Economy, that came out a couple of years back. Right. And one of the things we do is we built the new sales competency map. And it's pretty comprehensive. And when I walk a team of people through the checklist of what the new sales competency map is, but why, like why you need these skills, then a lot of salespeople will say, they're willing to put their hand up and say, I've got gaps. So I think if you use subjective benchmarks from the industry where you can walk people through and they can assess themselves. And I work with the Canadian Professional Sales Association as well, and they have a light assessment, so to speak. It's not their full exam, just to let you kind of know where you're at. And tools like that are great too, because the minute your manager tells you or the owner of the company says this is what you're doing wrong, you often go, well, you're biased, or you don't know me, or we've got this relationship. But if a third-party tool that's done, not by a human but by me, putting information in, spits out the results, sometimes that can be effective too, to just sort of show them where they need to improve. And most salespeople, like the people will say to me when they hire me, you got to watch out for Bob and Sarah, because Bob and Sarah have been around a long time. They know a lot. They're really effective at selling, and so you got to watch out for them. And they're going to be trouble. And do you know where Bob and Sarah are when I get there in the morning? In the front row. And they got their notepad. And you ask Bob, who's been selling for 25 years, Bob, why are you here? You say, I'm looking for one more thing. I want to learn one more thing. If I can get one thing out of this whole day, it'll be worth coming here. And that's the attitude. My challenge is often with the mediocre salespeople. who aren't cutting their numbers, and they're like, I know it all. And that's why the minute you say I know instead of I'm curious, that's where your sales stops to grow, right?
Got to be open. So is there questions in the audience, by the way? Anybody? Yeah, please.
So Shane, obviously businesses are looking to improve, they got limited resources. When you're trying to get a business to see the value in coaching and what benefit that can have,
Yes.
what's the main objection that you get, and how do you solve that?
Yeah, and I think, for me, like coaching is a small part of our overall business, right? Like and it's often in tandem with the whole solution. But yeah, one of the main objections, I get is time. So it's often not money. It used to be at some point, but I find it's not that they don't have a challenge with the investment. It's the time. Oh, I got to take my people offline, or it's difficult to get them all together. So that's one of the big objections. One of my answers is, well, let's do like half of it asynchronous, where they get to view content, and then we can cut the time that they sit down with us. And the other one is just to do the math on them on, like, I've done an assessment on their present process, and there's 6 things their process is missing. What is this costing you? How many deals are you hemorrhaging every day? And so you're going to pull your team offline. Worst case scenario is it's going to cost you wages. It's not going to kill your pipeline to take them offline 3 days over the next quarter. But what is it costing you? What if you don't invest in this person, they continue to struggle and they quit? And then their pipeline, when the new person comes in, typically you lose about at least a third of the opportunities when a new person takes over a pipeline. So as we start to have these conversations, and on the other side, I tend to have a lot of inbound leads from my social media marketing, from my brand, from my books, and I don't find I struggle as much. It's the people that I cold call, which I still do, who are like, who are you? What have you done? Right? It gets more difficult. So, in a perfect world, I don't get that a lot from inbound leads. I don't know if that's helpful or, yeah.
Another question? Yeah, please do.
So I think as you mature in your profession, you realize that authenticity and empathy are major driving factors and what really leads to long-term relationships and good selling motions. How do you teach authenticity and empathy?
Well,
That's a big one.
I think it's a company value. So if we're authentic and empathetic with our sales team, then that creates an environment where they're going to mirror that in the marketplace. So I think that's one of the first parts. And then I'm not an empathy expert. I'd like to know more. I'd like to be better at teaching it. My partner, her name is Little Wu, and that's actually she's doing a master's right now in restorative practice and justice, and that's what they focus on, is developing empathetic environments. And a big one is, I think the first part of empathy is teaching people how to hold space and suspend judgment. And that's a really interesting activity. One of the activities we'll do is role playing, where one salesperson will sell to the other person will be a buyer, but there's a third person who's the observer. And their whole goal is just to observe and make note, and then ask questions after to understand why both of them responded the way they did. And so it's actually teaching someone observer skills and holding space, because most people just wait for their turn to talk. And they don't listen to understand, they listen to react. And so it is actually something that we can workshop and work on from that perspective, from an empathy perspective. But I think as a leader, if we can be more empathetic, and that is like when someone's numbers drop, but they're a good salesperson, we don't haul them up and say, what's wrong with you and how come you've been late? And, I'm going to put you on a PIP, a performance improvement program. It's, you usually have been rocking it the last 3 quarters. Is there something going on I can help you with? Like, is there some challenges outside of work, or is there some tension around here I should know about? And if that's our first conversation, instead of what are your numbers, then creating empathy in the business allows that person to mirror that in the marketplace as well. Great question.
Great. Yeah. Any more questions? We answered it all? Wow. So, what's interesting as well, we're talking about normally in sales, you'd be deceitful in a way. I don't want to say that exactly, but you don't tell the truth. Salespeople normally don't want to say the bad stuff, right? You'd say all the good stuff, and then oh, no, yeah, maybe we do that. Yeah, we can, yes, right? That approach. I say the way it is, right? And the reality is that we're talking about empathy. We're talking about being truthful. We're talking about looking at the bigger picture. We're talking about deeper. It seems to me like the pendulum is swinging now, post-pandemic, into an era where we need to cut the the nonsense, if you will, and really get into this, being one-on-one with people.
Human interaction means more now.
Yeah.
So just being here, like because we were to some degree locked down to some degree or other for like 2 years, all of a sudden, like just even going for a coffee with a business associate, it like means something. Like in the past, it was just sort of coffee, but now that we value that human engagement, and I think that the people are expecting, more authentic engagement, as a result. And I think the truth factor, I don't think that, I think the best sales professionals, who can sleep at night, and who can actually live in a community for their whole life and sell and maybe work for different companies, have always been ethical. Because they know that you can't like live in Red Deer or live in Calgary and then rip 4 or 5 people off in the community and then go and work for someone else. That reputation is going to follow you. So people know that like the long game is always the best game in selling, and it doesn't always put you ahead of the pack initially. And I think that's the long-term focus is a really important part. And that's a challenge because people, a lot of people are got quarterly earnings that they're accountable to, and stock, shareholders and stress, and so it's really interesting as a sales manager and sales leader. If you're leading a team, you have to manage up almost more than you need to manage down. You got to protect your team. You get weird mandates coming down from the top saying you team to this, we're going this direction, and a good leader will time out. I need to tell you the truth about what you're suggesting because here's this kind of pack the team, and I got to take care of my team because I want them to get results. And because if we don't do that and we just say yes sir, then what happens is short-term gain is the brass is happy with us, but the long-term failure is we're going to be fired anyway when our team isn't performing, right? So it's not really a win.
I mean, I agree totally. It's you need to move from this numbers game, which is cool, right? But you need to move towards this long game, right? And I think people today need this, particularly even from the vendor community with the actual channel partners that they're working with, right? I think the smart channel partners are looking at the vendors that is looking at the long game as well, because sometimes it takes time for a relationship to mature and to bear fruit, right? You just can't plant a tree apparently and have it bear pears and stuff like that right away, right? It takes some time.
Yeah. And I think, and you always got to be careful with this because it is sales. So at the end of the day, you're judged by revenues.
Yeah.
And so I think it's empathy and it's great leadership with an element of extreme accountability.
Right.
And I think that is, if we don't have the accountability and have that culture when people are hired and then we bring it in, it's more difficult. And so, from the get-go, it's like, hey, we're going to tell each other the truth. If you're not performing over a period of time, here's what's going to happen. I'm accountable as a leader to give you all the tools you need to get there. No excuses. I'm not going to blame operations or the tech team. I'm going to give you what you need. But on the other side, you need to give me what I need and what you commit to, right? But we can do that with empathy, right?
We've got about 5 minutes left for the session. But so MSPs and channel partners have their sales team or they're selling themselves, and they know there's a roadmap to kind of change up the game a little bit, right? What's the next step they should be taking? Sometimes, we do these conferences, we talk a lot of stuff. It's really great information. Then we all jump in a car, drive back home, and on the way, we stop off and pick up coffee, and we forget most of it on the way done. You get back in the office, and then boom, you're back to the way it was before. But concretely, like what do you suggest they do to ensure that they follow up and take action on this?
Take action in the aspect of like selling risk and getting better at this side of selling.
Upping their game in sales.
Upping their game, yeah. I think one of them is, at the top end, for me, is to work, let's say you're working with me or another provider. If you decide, internally you may have this, here's the first thing. First thing is if you don't have a sales playbook for you and your team, if you're a team of one and you want to hire, before you hire, build your sales playbook. Doesn't have to be a 90-page document. It could be literally 1 page on each step of your sales process, you as a leader. So who are your ideal client personas? What are your 4 or 5 ways that you can approach them effectively, from phones to visiting to networking? What are the best practices in that? Page on each. What are your core objections and answers for them? And then what are the questions that you should be asking, right? When you sit them before you do a demo or talk about a product or talk about a solution, right? And then, down the tail end is, what are your KPIs? What are expected you from your numbers, and why? Like, what results will they give you? And so a lot of times with sales leaders or people who are entrepreneurs, one of the reasons why we keep getting stuck with, hiring people and they leave, and hiring people who leave, and they're, how come they can't sell like I can? But we haven't taken the time to take it out of our head and actually structure it. So building a sales playbook, and then looking at the best practices at each step, like what skills are needed to execute each step well, and then ask the question, like, do I have the bench strength within my team to train my people to do this? Or then do I approach an outside sales provider like Sales Academy, ourselves, to help them train their people around that, develop them? And even before that, it may be an assessment of the team. If you got an existing team and process, and maybe that's not your wheelhouse, you don't have a sales background, but you're rocking along and landing customers organically, but you want to know where you're at, then maybe a third-party assessment is a good way to start.
We talk a lot about the new way of selling, and it's not really new. It should have been what we've been doing in the first place, right? But as a lot of salespeople have already, they're in the game.
Yeah.
They know how to do the stuff, right? And we're not saying that their skills are not important today, right? It just needs to be upgraded, like a 2.0 type thing, right? Because you still need the traditional baseline selling, right? Empathy, building relationships, that type of thing.
I think people skills have become more important.
Yeah.
Like, I think that, if there's, I'm going to use the analogy of the Iron Man suit, because it's been overused, but I'm going to use it for artificial intelligence and automation and business intelligence, is that if you have like one salesperson in the marketplace who's got access to artificial intelligence and helping them make their decisions and going through their CRM and looking at customer behaviors and telling them what accounts and to prioritize and go after and where people are at, and then automating appointment bookings and customer research and all that kind of fun stuff, then that makes them really powerful, gives them an advantage in the marketplace. But today, as we all know, AI is now becoming just an ambient thing running in the background, and it's now present in most CRMs, and it's starting to be just part of what we do. So now if everybody's got an Iron Man suit on, then it comes down to the pilot, right? And so from this perspective, the people skills, if we're all automated and efficient, its goal is to give us more time to actually do what we're good at as salespeople, which is talk to people. It means less of my time is spent entering data or making decisions or doing research. That stuff just bubbles up to the top for me, and it should give me more time to talk to people. So if that's true, then your only safe place as a salesperson is not getting better at cutting and pasting, or being a human API in the office to connect with marketing. It's actually going to be people skills and leadership skills and communication skills. With that said, you can't be doing it with a 5-year-old phone and a notepad. Yeah. You need the tech tools, because that's just the ticket to the sales conference. But after that, the people skills are what the differentiator is going to be.
Well, Shane, thank you for this information, and I hope that everybody grabs a little bit of it and take it back and do something with it.
Awesome to get back in person and back to company.
Yeah,
for
sure.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.